Thinking Dutchman has made a video about Ricky Gervais and how he's wrong about atheism. I'm pretty certain that this will be an easy one to skip tick off the list as debunked.
Last year I made a video about Ricky Gervais who tried to hide behind this silly definition of atheism. I received a lot of comments from atheists who were, to say the least, not happy with my evaluation. I noticed they all said similar things in response to my video. In this video I will respond to 3 common criticisms and show you that they totally missed the point. Welcome to the channel, I'm Kyle de Lange and I want to help you see that Christianity is both reasonable and true. Atheists make a distinction between 2 kinds of atheists. There's the Gnostic atheist who states there is no God, and there's the agnostic atheist who states I don't know whether there's a God, but I just lack a belief in God's existence. Most atheists who commented on my video like to call themselves agnostic atheists. Their point is that only the Gnostic atheist bears the burden of proof, not the agnostic atheist.
We don't have to show why we don't believe. It's up to the believer to show they have a valid reason for their belief to convince others. The burden of proof is not on the rejection of a claim.
The people who said I used the wrong definition and that therefore my case fails completely missed the point. I'm not at all interested in giving the correct definition of atheism or to explain what happens psychologically with atheists. Whether they just lack a belief or actively believe that God does not exist, it really doesn't matter to me. This is not about the definition of atheism. My video was simply an invitation to join the debate about God's existence. I'm fine with atheists who say they just lack a belief in God. I will not put a label on them. They are free to use whatever label they want. I cannot look into their psyche, but I do have a problem with inconsistency. If you call yourself an agnostic atheist and argue that you therefore don't have any burden of proof, then you should also be prepared to explain the reason why you put that label on yourself.
Huh?
Is the reason that you are completely ignorant about the subject? Alright, then you're right, you don't have the burden of proof. But then it's important that you don't pretend to know things about it. The moment you claim stuff like, there's no evidence for God, or evolution is the best explanation for morality and biological information, or the multiverse is the solution for the fine-tuning problem, etc., you bear the burden of proof. Or maybe the reason is that you are not sure, but that you do think that God probably does not exist. Now you bear the burden of proof, because this is not simply a lack of belief. This is actively believing that God does not exist. The theist is perfectly reasonable to ask, why do you think God probably does not exist? The atheist could respond, as many atheists do, well, there's no evidence that God exists. Then the theist can ask, what do you mean with evidence? And how do you know there's no evidence that God exists? The atheist has the responsibility to answer this question because he made the claim. Even when someone says he's perfectly agnostic, he can still have the burden of proof. For example, it may well be that you think that God's existence is 50-50 in your head. That does not necessarily mean that you are completely ignorant and therefore don't have the burden of proof. Maybe you've carefully weighed all the evidence and came to this conclusion. If you say, I've looked into the evidence and as a result I'm completely agnostic about God's existence, then you have the burden of proof to show what evidence brought you to this conclusion. So the point is this. Only the people who say nothing or claim to be completely ignorant about a certain subject don't have the burden of proof. In other words, when you claim you just lack a belief in something, whether it is God, reincarnation or leprechauns, then you claim that you are completely ignorant about that subject. Then it is true, you don't have the burden of proof. But then you should be consistent and not enter into a discussion pretending to know things about it. It doesn't make sense to on the one hand claim to be totally ignorant about a certain subject and on the other hand pretend to know things about that subject.
Huh?
That's inconsistent. Of course, it is never inconsistent to simply ask questions. If a Hindu comes up to you and says reincarnation is a fact, you are perfectly reasonable to ask, why do you think that? And if that person says, prove me wrong, then you can say, no, I don't have to. I didn't make a claim, you did. So you need to give me evidence. But it would not be reasonable to pretend to know things about reincarnation when that is actually not the case. Maybe you have never investigated this subject, but you do claim there's no evidence for reincarnation. The Hindu is right to ask, how do you know that? The honest thing you could say would be, I'm not aware of any evidence for reincarnation. Maybe you can enlighten me? Since there are many agnostic atheists out there who do argue vigorously against God, they are inconsistent and need to be honest and state what they do believe instead of claiming that they just lack belief. This is how we can have a meaningful discussion. Stephen Woodford from Rationality Rules noticed something that proves my point. In philosophy, the strong or metaphysical definition of atheism is preferred, and in common circles, the weak or psychological definition is preferred.
In the third chapter, we explored atheism as defined as the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods, and considered a few reasons as to why this definition is favoured in the philosophical literature. In short, it's favoured because philosophers are not so much concerned about what people believe, but rather what's true, and one psychological state isn't a proposition.
This proves my point. The reason why philosophers like the metaphysical definition is because they want to discuss truth. They are not interested in someone's psychological state. They are just interested in truth and sound arguments. So in short, if you are in the pursuit of truth, then you should be honest about your beliefs. If you are ignorant and unprepared to defend your position, then just say that. And if you claim to know something, be prepared to bear your burden of proof and don't hide behind silly labels. All of us have a worldview with many positive beliefs, and therefore, all of us have the burden of proof. And this brings me to the second criticism. Some atheists commented and said, atheism is not a worldview. The commentators argued that I was wrong to claim that atheism is a worldview, since there are many different atheistic beliefs, such as secular humanism, Buddhism and Marxism. I agree that there are many different atheistic beliefs, but so what? Is there no burden of proof anymore because there are different kinds of atheistic beliefs? What I meant is that even though there are many atheistic beliefs, any worldview that leaves out the existence of God has major implications. The answers we give to the big questions such as, where do we come from? What is the meaning of life? Is there objective good and evil? Where do we go when we die? Depend to a large degree to our beliefs about God. The answers to those questions require evidence, so my point remains valid. Atheists, just like theists, have many particular positive beliefs for which they bear the burden of proof. So the atheist, whether he is a humanist, Marxist, Buddhist or whatever, has the burden of proof to explain, among other things, where the universe comes from, how our moral intuitions can be accounted for without God, how natural processes can generate new information and how life arose from non-life, etc. Keep this in mind for the third criticism. Analogies show that atheists don't have the burden of proof. Many atheists give analogies between a lack of belief in God and a lack of belief in other things. With these analogies, they want to prove that their weak definition of atheism is justified. Think about the lack of belief in leprechauns or reincarnation. A person who believes in these things bears the burden of proof, not the one who lacks belief. It would be absurd if I said to someone that there are invisible leprechauns all around us and that he needs to prove me wrong. The person who makes the claim bears the burden of proof. Similarly, the atheist argues, only the person who claims that God exists bears the burden of proof, not the atheist who just lacks belief. So what is the problem with their analogy? Well, the comparison between God and these things is not good because the lack of belief in these things don't imply any important positive beliefs. As I've shown, this is not the case with the lack of belief in God. Positive beliefs require evidence. But then the atheist might say, well, there's still a major difference between the theist and the atheist. Atheism is the default position, while theism requires knowledge of some kind. If we assume the psychological definition of atheism, then yes, we all start as atheists. But as we've seen, this definition only applies to people who are completely ignorant about God's existence. So if an atheist thinks he's not completely ignorant and wishes to discuss truth, then he should not hide behind this definition. Truth seekers don't care about psychological labels, only about facts and evidence. A fact that we all start with is the universe. Theists and atheists agree that the universe exists. Where does it come from? There are roughly two explanations for this fact. Either nothing caused it or something caused it. The theist says something must have caused it. This something cannot be part of the universe because something cannot cause itself. So it must be outside space, time and matter. Only a personal being fits the description. So when you conclude that something must have caused the universe, you already are a theist or a deist. The atheist, if he wants to remain an atheist, must therefore conclude that nothing caused the universe. The universe just is. Maybe it has always existed and therefore does not need a cause. Or maybe there's a multiverse that never began. But do you see that these are positive beliefs that require evidence? For convenience, we can call all space, time and matter, whether universe or multiverse, nature. Is nature all there is? Or is there something like a supernature? Is nature caused by something or nothing? If you say, I really don't have a clue, then you are just ignorant and there is no burden of proof. In that case, you should just listen to both sides, learn from them and then make up your mind. If you say, nothing caused it, or probably nothing caused it, or I'm 50% sure that nothing caused it, then you already have the burden of proof to defend your position. These are the three major criticisms I received from atheists. We've seen that they all miss the point. The point is that sincere truth seekers are not interested in hiding behind psychological labels because they know that these labels don't have any relevance in the pursuit of truth. Truth seekers also realize that we all have a worldview, and that therefore we all have the burden of proof. Analogies between a lack of belief in leprechauns and a lack of belief in God fail, because a lack of belief in leprechauns do not imply any important positive beliefs, while a lack of belief in God does. We all have to answer the big questions of life, such as where does the universe come from? What is the meaning of life? What is the nature of good and evil? What happens when we die? On this channel I deal with questions such as these. My main goal is to expose you to the strong evidence that Christianity is true. If you're interested in the intellectual side of Christianity, then subscribe, hit the bell and check out this video to see why I think the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is compelling. Thanks for watching, I will see you over there.